Hi, I'm Daniel Kirk, children's book author and illustrator. I've been making books now for over a quarter of a century, and after all that time and nearly 50 books, I still love to write and draw. One of the questions people always ask me is, did you like to write and draw when you were a kid? And the answer is a big yes! I believe that all children are creative, and that given half a chance, any kid will enjoy fanning that creative flame that's inside each of us. Being inspired by what we see around us and learning how to use our own brains, hearts, and hands to make things can be a truly rewarding part of life. It certainly has been for me. Now, what does it mean to get inspired? You see something that gets you excited and gives you the idea that you want to do something like that too. Maybe you go to a ball game and seeing those players makes you want to spend every waking minute practicing baseball. Or you see somebody singing and it really makes you want to get up on stage or join a band. Or you hear about somebody helping animals at a shelter and it touches your heart and it makes you want to do that too. Everybody's inspired by different things. For me, it was drawing and writing, finding my own stories, creating my world. When you get inspired, it can change your life. So let me share with you a little about my childhood and what got me excited and inspired to create. I grew up in Ohio. As a little boy, I loved toys and puppets and make-believe. I've always loved animals. What a treat to have my grandma's bird, Tweety, sit on my shoulder. From my earliest years, I liked to draw what I loved. Here's a crayon drawing of a red bird, like Tweety, that I made when I was 5. Animals still play a big part in the books I create today. How did I get interested, though, in art and making things? Before I ever started to draw, my mom bought me some modeling clay. It was the first art material I ever played with. It came in different colors. You could make it into all kinds of shapes, creating whatever you could imagine. I loved clay so much that my mom would say, "Danny isn't playing, he's claying." That isn't really a picture of my mom, but she really did say that. Here's the house I grew up in. Here's my brother David and I coming down the front steps. We spent a lot of time playing make-believe with our favorite toys. As a boy, I tried all the usual things to find out what I was good at. Everybody wants to be good at something, and everybody has talents just waiting to be discovered. I found I loved using my imagination, dressing up in costumes and pretending. I loved feeling like I was a character in a story of my own making. My dad read to me every night before bed. Books were a big part of my childhood. When I got old enough, I'd read out loud to my dad, and he loved hearing me read my favorite books to him, too. From an early age, I loved books about dinosaurs. My friends and I were always digging for fossils in the backyard. And in the winter, we didn't build ordinary snowmen, we made snow dinosaurs. We had lots of little golden books in our house. Some of them were animal stories. Some were versions of old fairy tales with bad wolves, witches, giants, kings, queens, and brave knights. These books were cheap and easy to find, and they had fantastic illustrations that inspired me to draw. Mom and Dad always supported my love of reading, art, and making things. In fact, one interesting thing about my parents is that they were creative too. They were puppeteers, which means that they put on puppet shows for kids. Dad made the puppet heads and wrote the scripts for the shows, and Mom would make the soft puppets and sew all of the costumes. For years, the two of them traveled around as Kirk's puppets, putting on shows for thousands of kids, and I was certainly inspired by my parents' creativity and love of story to make things of my own. So when I was old enough to hold a crayon, I started to draw, and it was fun. So many things inspired me. Like these little plastic toy men, for example. I drew lots of cowboys, adventurers, explorers, settlers, and soldiers. You can see how I really paid attention to all of the details of their clothes and weapons. Like characters in a book, there were good guys and bad guys, and the way they looked helped to tell their story. Inspired by this picture book, I started drawing clowns. I loved all of their bright colors and fancy outfits. The circus seemed like just about the most wonderful place in all the world to me. After seeing Peter Pan, I started drawing a lot of pirates. Here's Tinkerbell, Peter, and their pirate ship. There's nothing as exciting as finding buried treasure. Look, even the sun is wearing a patch over its eye. This pirate is wearing some awfully big boots. Check out that tri-corner hat. Here's a picture I drew of myself if I were a pirate. Since I'm left-handed, a hook from my right hand wouldn't have been so terrible. I like knights in armor and drew them too. Here's an early one. And here's one with more detail from a few years later. I drew all kinds of things. Here's Superman drawn when I was 6. Here's a picture of Mommy. A Native American in full feathered headgear. A pretty fall landscape. An artist's palette. Here's a picture I made one Thanksgiving, and I'll bet everybody in my first grade class drew the same picture. But look what I drew on the other side of that piece of paper. A horned monster and a shrunken head. I drew the things I found fascinating. Now, if I had loved riding horses, or playing sports, or solving math problems, or acting in a theater, I would have been inspired to get better at those things, because we all long for mastery, to be the best at what we do, at what we love. I love to draw. Here's an Egyptian mummy from when I was just 6 years old. I'm not sure how I even knew what mummies were at that age. Here's a scary Halloween bat from around the same time. The very first Halloween I went out trick-or-treating, I wore a witch costume. Strange and spooky things turn up a lot in the art I made as a child. Looking back, I can see that I was drawn to these subjects maybe because monsters are different. They're special, they're out of the ordinary, and they're often misunderstood. My favorite monsters didn't mean to be bad, but they had strong feelings, and sometimes they made terrible mistakes. Maybe people just didn't know how to see them the right way. I think my brother and I sometimes felt a little like that ourselves. Together, David and I made our very first picture book, a scary story called The Thing from Venus. I wrote the words, and my brother drew the pictures. We were both fascinated by the thought of life on other planets, and we often drew from our imaginations about what might be up there in outer space. Earlier, I mentioned how much I love playing with clay. Here are a couple of my school-age creations. A mythical creature called Medusa, a woman with snakes for hair. A shoebox diorama of a caveman, and an Egyptian sphinx. Whenever we had to make a diorama for school, I couldn't wait to get started and find a shoebox. It was fun. Here's another diorama, one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now, we're all influenced by our environment, the world we grew up in, and like all kids, I love to watch TV. Besides cartoons, I watched Lucy's Toy Shop, which featured puppets and a talking tree. Flippo the Clown was on the air every afternoon after school. Flippo told jokes and showed old cartoons and movies. I was lucky to meet Flippo, and I thought clowns were funny and nice. Around this time, there were a couple of funny monster shows on TV, The Addams Family and The Munsters. These programs made it seem like monsters were just like everybody else. There were also popular TV shows about witches, a genie in a bottle, programs where you could get lost in space or trapped in the Twilight Zone. Fascinating stuff and very inspiring. Sometimes my parents let me stay up late on weekends to watch scary old movies on TV. I couldn't wait for Friday night. There was a really cool restaurant just a few miles away from our house called the Kahiki. It had giant tiki torches outside, wall-to-wall fish tanks and birds flying around when you went in. You could drink fancy drinks out of mugs with faces. Normal life and the world of fantasy weren't always so far apart. In downtown Columbus, there was a magic shop, a costume shop, a couple of great bookstores, places to get comic books and monster magazines, and Planters Peanuts, where it was always a treat to get a bag of hot roasted nuts. The Southern Theater showed up to 4 old monster movies every Saturday afternoon, and I'd take the bus downtown to watch them all. The world, to me, was a magical, inspiring place. I was also a big fan of magic tricks, and I wondered if maybe I could be a magician when I grew up. I spent hours poring over magic catalogs, learning about tricks. The magic shop downtown had tricks a boy could afford, not to mention monster masks, makeup, and costume supplies. And I went there to look around and spend my allowance as often as I could. Here I am pouring milk into my brother's ear with a magic pitcher. Here I am doing my rope trick at home in the kitchen. That outfit I wore was also perfect for when I wanted to dress up as a vampire. As a kid, I made my own magic magazines with handwritten tricks I had read about and learned. I was inspired. When I was a boy and I wasn't drawing, playing with clay, or doing magic, I spent a lot of time reading. There were a lot of magazines for kids that I liked to read. Jack and Jill, Children's Digest, Humpty Dumpty, Highlights for Children, Boy's Life, and more. I read books on how to draw and paint, hoping I might learn some secrets to improve my skills. One of my favorite publications was Mad, a humor magazine for kids. I'd read every issue over and over again. But my all-time favorite magazine was called Famous Monsters of Filmland. Okay, here's a scary picture alert. If you're easily frightened, I think you ought to look away and count to 15, then it should be safe to come back. From the first issue of Famous Monsters I picked up at the local pharmacy, I was hooked. I loved the wild paintings on the covers of the magazines, often created by an artist named Basil Gogos. Inside the magazine were articles about so many of the scary movies I'd been staying up late to watch on TV. I was inspired. I started making my own monster magazines. I learned a lot of art skills by studying and copying the illustrations on the covers. Sometimes I would just draw and letter a cover. Other times I wrote articles for inside, even putting make-believe ads in the back. I was really starting to think of myself as an artist, and when I put one of my paintings in a frame, I dressed up in a beret and fake beard to pose for this picture. I felt very proud. Back in the 1960s, monsters were just about everywhere. You could buy monster paint-by-number kits, monster puzzles, monster toys and games, and monster models. For around $1, you'd get a cardboard box full of little plastic pieces, and following the instructions, glue the pieces together, then paint the model to look as much like the picture on the box as you could make it. I loved these models, and I put together dozens of them. Some of the monsters were scary, some were silly, but they were great fun to build, and my dad not only helped me make the models, but put shelves around my bedroom so I could display my creations. I think a lot of my painting skills and attention to detail came from all the practice I had painting those models. Once I entered a monster model contest, and I added some extra things to the basic creature model. They call that customizing. And surprise, I won first place in my neighborhood contest. My trophy was a plastic picture of Frankenstein I could hang on the wall. Everything around me inspired me to make things of my own. The ads in the back of magazines for masks gave me the idea to try to make my own monster masks out of paper bags. Monsters in movies made me want to make my own monsters out of paper mache. My brother and I would start with big balloons, cover them in newspaper strips dipped in wet wheat paste, and then when it dried, we would paint on the features. Posters for monster movies inspired me to make my own posters and hang them on the wall. Chapter books I got from the Scholastic Book Club at school inspired me to write my own scary tales like this one I called Famous Ghost Stories. I dreamed up this book of silly stories based on the kind of humor you'd find in Mad magazine. When I was a kid, I really wanted to have my own museum of unusual things. Sometimes I'd fix up my room and invite people over to look at my collections. I made this monster hand out of clay, and I put it in a box along with a description that would go alongside the hand in my own little museum. There were always plenty of mad scientists in my favorite scary magazines. I thought, how cool would it be to have a mad scientist lab down in my own basement? So I built one. I love to write and draw in my spare time, but I also use my art to help me in school. I drew illustrations in my reports to get extra credit. I drew these portraits of the presidents of the United States based on little toy presidents I had at home. In the cafeteria at lunch, my friends would tell me which monsters they'd like to see fighting, and I'd sketch them right up when I should have been eating my lunch. At school, I doodled on my notes and papers. Once in a while, I did posters for school events. The only time I ever got into trouble for my art was when I decided to make silly caricatures of my teachers driving funny cars. I guess I was inspired by Mad magazine, but I shared one of these drawings with my friends in class. Mr. Osbald saw my drawing and sent me to the office where I was lectured by the principal about how I wasn't showing the proper respect. I think I learned my lesson. I made this picture as a birthday present for my little brother. It didn't cost me anything, and he had it hanging on his bedroom wall for years. Homemade art makes a great gift. I like sending and receiving greeting cards. The ones you could buy in the stores were often very funny and had cool art, and I was inspired, so I tried making my own. That one at the end has a pop-up arm that comes out when you open the card. When I was a kid, you could buy monster bubblegum cards at the store. For a nickel, you'd get a stick of gum and 5 little cards based on different themes. Of course, I loved the monster cards the best, and I tried making some myself. Here's a set I did when I was around 12. I tried writing my own newspapers. I imagined opening up Kirk's Circus with lots of clowns and performing animals. I loved playing board games, so guess what? I made board games of my own and played them with my brother. Here's my San Francisco earthquake game. And here's the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde game that I made. My mom and dad encouraged me to create. At the elementary school, they volunteered to put on a spook show as part of the annual fundraising fun fair. Most of the attractions were games, like a fish toss or the cakewalk. But every year, our Kirk family spook room was always the big hit. I made posters on the different themes to hang on the school walls, decorations for inside the spook room, and even passes for the kids who worked there. As I said earlier, Famous Monsters magazine was a huge influence on me when I was little. When I was around 10, the man who wrote and edited the magazine, Forrest J. Ackerman, sponsored a contest. He and his wife were going to be making a cross-country trip, and Forey, as his fans called him, wanted to meet some of his readers. So he asked kids to write him with the reasons he ought to stop at their homes along the way. The best letters he got would be rewarded with a visit from the man behind my favorite magazine. My dad helped me write a really good letter, and I was lucky to be a winner. I couldn't wait for the day to come. And Forey showed up one August morning with his wife, Dracula's ring, and some rare magazines to show the neighborhood kids. Here he is posing with all of us in the mummy sarcophagus I'd made out of cardboard and paper mache. This is how my bedroom was decorated at the time. Years later, when I had grown up, I got the chance to illustrate some new covers for Forey at Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, which was amazingly still being published. Here's another scary picture alert, though. If you're sensitive, look away and count to 10. After that, you should be fine. These are the Monster magazine covers I painted. I used bright colors and scary faces to try to get that look I'd loved so much as a kid, and it was a thrill to have Forey call me on the phone and congratulate me on the good job I'd done for him. Something that really inspired me when I was just a boy had rewards decades later. As a child, I'd always loved reading comic books, and as I got to be a teenager, I started writing and illustrating my own comics. By this time, my interests were broadening. Once in a while, I'd invent a new superhero, but fantasy, mystery, and adventure were my usual subjects. Kids always wonder what they're going to do for a living when they're all grown up, and I was no exception. I thought maybe someday I'd draw comic books for a living. I thought maybe I'd make greeting cards. I thought maybe I'd be a Hollywood screenwriter or a makeup artist or a special effects artist working in the movies. I thought maybe I'd be a magician or make paintings like Pablo Picasso and show my art in museums around the world. I thought maybe I'd write books and become a famous author. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life, but I knew I loved making things. If I could find a way to do that for a living, to do something really creative, that would be perfect for me. And here I am after all these years, still writing stories and drawing pictures, just like I always did. No more scary stuff, though. I discovered that making picture books for children was the perfect way for me to express myself with words and pictures. My greatest hope is that the work I do will inspire children to try their hand at being creative, to make art and tell stories of their own. We all have creative spirits that long to be expressed. We all have tales to tell inside of us, waiting to come out. I hope you find a way to tell your own story and to share it with others in whatever way you choose. More than anything else, it's fun to be creative, to express what's inside you, to shape your world in a way that makes you happy. And here are a few lessons to remember. If you love doing something and you want to get better at it, no matter what it is, practice. Practice some more. If you love what you're doing, it won't really feel like work. Learn from the masters, read books, watch videos, take lessons. You might get frustrated sometimes when progress is slow, but nobody's perfect and learning takes time. Hey, I'm still learning something every day. Let yourself get inspired. That's what it's all about. Thanks for listening. I hope you're discovering some of the hidden talents you have inside. When you spend time doing what you love, you make your world a richer, more rewarding place to live.